Good evening. Welcome in Pakkers de Zwijger. Welcome at Fotokroniek, the first edition after summer. As you hear, this edition will be in English. Except this. Deze editie is dus in het Nederlands. Omdat we een grote schare internationale fans van onze fotograaf verwachten. En omdat we livestreamen. Mocht u nou straks een vraag willen stellen, maar daar ongemakkelijk uitkomen in het Engels of niet helemaal zeker over voelen, voel je vrij om in het Nederlands gewoon te vragen. Dan kunnen we dat vertalen. En mocht je iets niet begrijpen en de helft van het gesprek of de presentatie missen omdat je bij een woord blijft haken waarvan je de betekenis niet weet, steek gewoon je hand op. Want onze fotograaf die te gast is, die spreekt wel uitstekend Nederlands. And who is this photographer? Well, he's one who published a new book, his first book last summer, Tales of the Roads Less Traveled. He's a self-taught photographer. I think he published already many pics, but at Instagram. Who is a follower of the photographer of tonight at Instagram? Here are the groupies. No, kidding. I'm actually not sure if he will get so many readers or buyers of his book as he has likes at Instagram, but I will ask him that question later on. He will also, of course, tell a lot about where his ambition as a photographer started and tell us everything about his last project that he published with Mendo together, the publisher. Please, a warm welcome for Pie Aerts.
Photography for me is bigger than just images. In fact, it's a way to be alive in this world. A way to connect, to learn, to see. To notice the moments that would otherwise pass by. To hold them in my hands a little longer and look at them from all angles. A magnifying glass for finding beauty in a constant quest for pretty things. A quest for connection and raw human emotion. Because in a world that's so guarded, fearful, and that increasingly pushes us to idealize perfection, there's nothing more beautiful than people that are willing to show you their soul. To show you the simple, imperfect, and mysterious nature of being human, the unfiltered reality of life. And there's something very strange and touching about that, something I can't get enough of. Because whatever your religion, language, ethnicity, or color is, in the end we're all the same. We're all equal and helpless. We all face the same insecurities, the same fears, the same desires to be heard. And when realizing that and expressing vulnerability, we start to see each other as one. And therefore, photography for me is not just about taking better images, but about living a better, fuller life. My name is Pie Aerts and I'm a photographer.
All right. So back in December 2018, when we created this movie in India, I was visualizing using it during the first time I was talking to a big group. Wasn't expecting it to happen this soon. Very welcome, everybody. Thank you, Gian, for the brief introduction. It's a big honor to meet some of you. I've seen some familiar faces in the audience, a lot of new faces as well. That's a good thing. As Gian said, if you don't really feel comfortable with the English, you can easily transfer to Dutch. I'm happy having any dialogue or conversation in Dutch with you. But first of all, I'm just curious how many of you are not Dutch. If you raise your hands. Okay, cool. And you all live in Amsterdam? Anybody not living in Amsterdam? Oh, that's great. And how many of you tell stories for a living? So either a journalist or a musician or marketeer or photographer, hands in the air? Cool. How many people work in the creative industry? Or consider themselves to work in the... Okay, nice. Right. I'm happy you came, guys, because for me, as a photographer, learning is like a continuum. It's like a thing that constantly keeps on working out throughout your career. So I really hope that today will be a very interactive session where you can ask questions to me, I can ask questions to you. We have a dialogue about storytelling and learn from each other. But let's go back in time a little bit. I have a few devices I have to use, one is the microphone and this is the second one. So it can be a bit confusing, but you all know my online identity, but I think it's nice to go back in time a little and show you who I really am as a person, because these days in a very superficial social media environment, people always forget there is people behind Instagram accounts. So in the next 10 minutes, I want to give you a little insight in how it once started and how I made my way all the way in the last 34 years up until here in this desk. So when I was a kid, I loved drawing. Other guys were often riding bicycles, playing outside, but I could lock myself in for hours and just play in the first stages, play with paint. And later I found out that drawing was my big passion. So I started drawing hours and hours and hours. I think it taught me to use some sort of imagination or fantasy within the four edges of a canvas. So at a very young age, I started to find out that creating stories on a piece of paper was something I liked a lot. And this is an example of back in the day. I guess I was 6 or 7 years old. So I always had some sort of, being a kid, we never traveled much. So we never traveled much overseas. My parents took us on annual trips to Spain or Italy. But on that desk, being a kid, I was always fantasizing about how the faraway overseas world would look like. And I guess it was some sort of foundation for my work at a later stage in life, that at a very young age I was already sincerely interested in different cultures. It's not an award-winning drawing, I would say, but at least it gives some impression. Because fast forward 25 years in time, I found the exact same feelings of emotion and of connection by actually visiting the areas I was imagining back home on that desk. This is a picture taken in West Papua in Indonesia, and I got the same kind of vibe I was experiencing as a kid by visiting actually these areas, and it brought me back in time, back to that desk, where there was no Google, there was no Instagram, and nowadays there's not many places left in the world undiscovered, but visiting these kind of places brings the memories back from being a kid and fantasizing about a world that it's distant and non-existent and far away. So drawing opened very much a fantasy environment for me. Another image of that same trip. Right, so on this rock is my dad, and the camera he's carrying is a Canon AE1, and I guess he's roughly 20 years old here. It's long time back in the day. So when I was 16, that camera was a present I got from him, and it never actually really triggered photography straight away from the bat, straight away from picking up this camera. But at least that was the first time I got in touch with photography in general, and I started practicing shooting analog. So we're talking early 2000, 99, 2000, more or less the early stages of digital photography. So my first introduction to photography was fully analog. And although my dad was having a little dark room back home where he was developing his own pictures, I never jumped into that. It was like too far. It was too strange. It was too far away. So I guess I was early adapter as a photographer in the digital age, but at least this is how it started. Oh, it happened? Yeah, right. So a few years later, when I was 19, I enrolled in hotel management school in Maastricht. That's where I studied my bachelor's. And on the age of 21 in 2006, I made my first big trip overseas. So that was the first time, believe it or not, but it was the first time I was leaving Europe, and the destination was Shanghai, a place where I couldn't read a single sign on the streets. I couldn't communicate a single word with the local people. So there was a big barrier. But the camera I brought, which at that time was a 400 EOS 400D. For those of you that have owned it, sometimes I still miss it because it was such an innocent time of walking around and snapping innocent pictures. But this was what I found in Shanghai. And the camera became some sort of a window for me to communicate with people while I was not able to actually speak the language. So the viewfinder, in that time, in the first 3-4 months of that trip, the first time I went with 6 months, became my way of communicating with local Chinese people. Strange. Oh, here we go. Right, so in that time, through that viewfinder, I found out that I was able to make friends without actually having conversations, and that was something very special. Not only in that time of my life, but in general, it was the first time I found out that photography is all about the connection between the subject and the photographer, and not necessarily about the picture, about the technical specs, or about the composition or the framing. It was all about the fun you have between the subject and the person who's clicking the shutter. So a few pictures from back in the day. That's all dated 2006. Not necessarily the best pictures of the last 15 years, but some that at least show you that connection is the real core of photography. Has always been the real core of photography for me. So this is all taken on that first China trip. I think I never published them before. Right, but something else happened at that very same period in my life, which is 2006, 2007, because people started to tell me that I needed to think about which company I would be employed in the next 30 years of my life being a CEO. Right, so that happened in the first stages of my bachelor, and in my bachelor period, people started telling me I should enroll in a master's program, and I had lots of fun doing it, so I never regretted a single minute of it. But during the master's program, people started telling me I should think about the next 5 years. I should enroll in some corporate traineeship. And when I did that, people in the company I was working for started to tell me that I had to think about 10 years ahead, 15 years ahead, 20. So at some stage, I started to get sick of only being planning the next 5 years of your life, right? And when I Googled this morning, I was making this presentation, I Googled CEO. This was the first picture that showed up. So that's why it's in the presentation. But when I'm looking back at that time, I feel a lot of happiness about the decisions I make. But I also feel a lot of regret about not standing up earlier and being brave enough to listen to your gut feeling. And I hope that's something we're going to discuss about a little more in the presentation today. Let me see. Right, so we're talking 2014, 2015. I was working 50 to 60 hours a week in a corporate company. On the same time, I was working 50 to 60 hours a week as a photographer. So I was doing trips all around the world. I was using every day off to make faraway trips. I went to India, to Indonesia, to many places far away I've been dreaming of for a long time. But I was not necessarily brave enough to choose for either or. So these two pictures I found on my phone this morning. It's very typical for that time of my life because I was not able to choose, right? This is the left picture is taken 24 hours earlier than the right picture. The left picture I was 4 weeks, straight after 4 weeks India, and the right one is back to the office. And at some it's nice, right? It's like I love being busy. I love being 24/7 involved in life. But if you keep on doing this, at some stage, it's getting too rough, right? And that happened in 2017 when I completely collapsed. And it's been something I've been very transparent and very open about online, and it's going to be a topic today as well. But I got completely burned out of not being able to choose either or, right? So the result was that the first 6 months were very terrifying. I couldn't even walk anymore. Just very classical burnout, I guess. But what's even more terrifying is at some stage I started to find out I was losing appetite not only in life but also in photography, and that was maybe the most scary part, because photography has always been not only a passion, but like it felt like something very deep inside, like a calling or something maybe that was at some stage taken away as well. So and then it was like, okay, right, we're going to stop all this bullshit. It's time to make a decision. It's time to quit my job, and that's what I did. I think it's the scariest thing I did in my life in 2018. I wasn't really fully recovered, but I decided to tell my manager to finalize the contract and to get out of service and to deep dive in a life of uncertainty and lots of question marks. But it is, and at the same time, it's been the most rewarding decision I ever made in my life. So more about this later as well. And that was also the moment that I was somehow pushed back to my photographic identity I created years earlier, and that's because people matter. It's in the name, but realizing that I was full-time available for storytelling suddenly in 2018. I started to move to more align my personal identity with my photographic identity, and in the birth of that, Because People Matter existed, and that completely took off, and I got so many amazing support from people around me that it felt like some sort of a new beginning, I guess. And the next step actually was there was some sort of, maybe it came, I don't know, when was the first year, Guni? When was the first time you reached out? 2017, I guess. It was more or less in the same time that I was picking up my new profession, that Mendo, we all know Mendo, I guess. If you don't, Google it, the publisher of the book. It's on the front cover. That these guys sent me an email, and I've been working with them for quite a while. I contributed to a few books in the past, but some sort of like a dot on the horizon existed like halfway 2017 when I was really struggling in finding that new identity, that Mendo reached out and offered me to create a book together. And that was the birth of Tales from the Road Less Traveled. And I find one of the funny facts is that the seed of this book is actually planted in my time at Albert Heijn back in the day, because it's always a little funny story to tell. But Yuri, unfortunately, is not here. It's one of the Mendo guys. But I was slicing bread on this, as an assistant supermarket manager, I was slicing the bread on a Saturday morning on this department, when a very nice, cute little lady showed up, which appeared to be Yuri's mother. And she started telling me about her son running a bookstore in Amsterdam. And years later, that son appeared to be Yuri. He's one of my good friends now. We created the book together. So not a single feeling of regret of the last 10 years. That's important to mention, because the seed of the book has been planted in all those years of investing in a career I was maybe not really willing and able to maintain. So that's a little introduction for now. The start of the book has actually happened a long time, I guess like 8 or 9 years ago, because the stories in the book are dating back to maybe 2011, but the majority of the stories in the book and the majority of the stories we're going to talk about today existed in the last 3 years. So we made a big trip. I'm sure some of you followed it, but together with Jess, my girlfriend, she's in the audience. Right. We made a big 18-month trip. This picture is taken in Uganda. So I think we're going to talk a lot about the last 18 months specifically, because the transition in the last 18 months has been massive compared to the stories shot in the previous years. So I hope you like it. Feel free to ask any questions. It's a little introduction from my side, and looking forward to hear what you want to know.
Thank you so much for this beautiful and personal introduction in how you came here. Yeah. And I'm happy that we are able to invite you now, that you make this big step.
Shall we sit down?
Yes, please. Is everything okay with the... Yeah. Well, actually, you already postponed a lot of topics that we can talk about while sitting here. But first of all, you in your whole personal story, there's no photography education somewhere. But everyone who has seen pictures of you will immediately see that these are very stylistic and aesthetic. Did you ever read a book or did a workshop on how to use the camera?
No, actually not. No. So, well, some people call it self-taught or autodidact, or there's many words of many ways of saying it. But I actually never really watched any YouTube tutorial as well. So I learned it on the streets, just by doing. And sometimes maybe I have the feeling I'm missing the educational background in some way. But on the other hand, I think it also opens a lot of new opportunities if you just stick to the street and learn from making hours behind the camera, just learn by doing. So yeah, I've been reading a lot of books in the last few years on photography and a lot of books on storytelling, but never really any educational literature. So it's more about I'm collecting photo books, I'm watching.
Do you learn from watching images from other people, or did you learn?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways of learning about not necessarily about storytelling, but maybe about image making, is by looking at images and by analyzing images together with your friends, together with other people, not necessarily other photographers, but just talk about pictures. Why is an image hitting you in the right way. What is an image telling you? I think that's a very good way of learning and growing as an artist.
And can you do that with your own pictures as well?
That's hard.
That's
Yeah, it's hard,
harder.
yeah.
Do you what are your inspirations? Like, for example, which I think we have a few that are pictures you may be able to analyze with us.
So there's a few photographers throughout my career that played obviously Steve McCurry played a very big role. I think nowadays still very known for his color work, absolutely exceptional. Very big on film as well. So the last few years, little to none new inspiring work, I have to say. But 80s, 90s is very impressive. So I'm owning a lot of books. I've every opportunity I get to meet him or to talk to him. So Mendo is occasionally organizing signing events. Amazing photographer. I would highly recommend if you don't know him to look him up and just analyze the way he uses color in composition and framing.
Like what? Like can you analyze what would you analyze about this picture?
No, well, this is maybe not necessarily the best example of color use, but the scene is. I think the scene is strong. It's very. It raises questions. I think a good image has stopping power for me at least, and the second good part about a good image is the fact that it raises questions and it invites for discussion. So I think this image is a perfect example of let's talk about what we see.
Right.
Yeah. And that's at least what I try to achieve in my own stories, to create some sense of multiple interpretations on one image, so people can start a discussion about something.
And do you know, like, when you are in the street, like, in what way do you look? Like, how do you find the picture?
I think photography is like some people call it the art of seeing. So
Yeah.
I think it all starts like go out without a camera and just first start seeing, right? Just start analyzing what you see. Start thinking about how light works with composition. Start thinking about how people move on the streets, how bodies move, how bodies interact. Start thinking about how composition can play in your favor, or just start analyzing what you see. I think
Like a rational process.
yeah,
Rational.
maybe more some sort of an emotional process. Just try to find your identity as a person and align that with what you see in the street. I think that's where a good image starts. Just stay close to yourself, stay true to yourself. Don't follow the trends. Don't follow just go out and experience life. I think for me, photography is some sort of how do you say that? Like a looking glass, a magnifying glass
Yeah.
for finding beautiful things in life. So as soon as I get out and I start looking through a viewfinder, I start searching for beautiful things, and start searching for meaningful things. And if you push yourself to like photography for me really enriches life in very, very many ways.
But also the daily life, because you go to beautiful places, as we can all see in your book and in your Instagram. Is this also a gaze, a vision that you use in daily life at the supermarket?
Yeah, I'm very aesthetic. I think I'm a realist, so I like to over aesthetize. Is that a word?
Yeah.
To beautify realistic situations.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I am as a person, and maybe not when I visit the supermarket, but when I work.
Why not when you visit the supermarket?
That's maybe more like a convenience. It's not really about enjoyment. Not anymore. It was for 10 years though, but not anymore. No, but going out maybe in the supermarket. I don't know. Just going out into life and just carry that same kind of curiosity and open-mindedness with you. I think that's very important when you want to experience storytelling.
But this, for you, this is triggered more when you are in very different places than when
not
you
necessarily. One thing I always tell people is, especially in these times when there is so much debate about the impact of travel and tourism on the planet, but you don't need to travel far to be able to tell good stories. So this is maybe not the best representation of not traveling far, this book, but it happened over time. But I always challenge myself, and at least in the last few months doing interviews to create a book, maybe the next book about the Netherlands, and to create the same kind of emotional vibe with the same impact, environmental impact, by just staying at home, because you really don't need to travel in order to tell a story. Stories are everywhere. Stories happen in hospitals. Story happens in supermarkets, on the street, in your own home, in your grandpa's garden, everywhere. It's all about how you interact with the emotional matter, and what you succeed in creating out of that.
Okay, well, let's go back with you to the street. So you look around, you analyze on your emotion what are compositions, and then suddenly a certain composition comes to you, and you just take the camera, or do you use lighting a lot? Or do you set up a whole scene?
Yeah, so I think there is a very big difference between street photography and environmental portraiture, and maybe travel photography, which is all three significantly represented in the book.
Yeah.
So let's talk street. I'm not the biggest.
Well, let's talk your language.
Yeah, well, that's hard because it's some sort of a mix of various forms of photography. So I really love environmental portraiture, to portray people in their own environment.
Yeah.
So not necessarily faces, but like portraits that tell a story. But that's a complete different approach than being on the street and actually interacting in a very dynamic street photography situation. So
and you use them all. They're all used in your.
Yeah, they're all
you mix
combined together.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find like my own style or my own identity by mixing a few other styles. I think a good photographer is able to photograph anything, whether it's interior or weddings or war or anything. I think, and by applying all those different techniques and all those different approaches, I think you grow as an artist as well by just challenging yourself to. So this book also shows very different ways of telling stories, I think. Yeah.
For example, I don't know, is this a picture from the book, or is it a picture from?
This is a
so
picture.
this person, did you stage him?
No. So what happens in these situations is people pay a lot of money to stage these pictures. Yeah, that happens a lot. So we went out with these fishermen that actually still fish the way you see here, but I felt I was very much looking for an in-between moment, not by necessarily staging, but because you can pay and then they stage the whole fishing situation. So I started to figure out whether there is possibilities to capture a real moment in something that it's actually touristically set up.
Right.
And this is the result. So I like the emotional impact, because this was actually in a 2-hour session. This was the only few moments that this guy was not being aware of.
Being a photographer.
Yeah. And that's the reason why this picture is in the book, and all the other 250 I took, I didn't really feel comfortable about using. Yeah.
So, for example, in this situation, you first got in touch with the person before you start going into the photography.
So what
process?
I think one important part of introducing yourself in a scene as a photographer is by not showing up, putting a camera straight away in people's faces, because back in the day, maybe 10 or 15 years ago or longer, being a photographer was unique and special. These days, people have cameras on their phones. Everybody is owning DSLRs, so there's cameras everywhere. So people get sick and tired of dealing with tourists all the time. So it all comes down, like a good picture comes down to how you enter a scene and how you introduce yourself as a human, not necessarily as a photographer. And just be happy and smile. You just open up and be a very good person, and when people feel comfortable with you being there, with your presence, then you can start picking up a camera, or you can start telling them that you actually try to create a story. Okay,
for you, so part of the process of making the picture is a whole interaction with the subject of the picture. Yeah.
But so back to what I just told you, street photography works completely different, because there is no time or space to introduce yourself in street, because then the moment is gone.
For like this is in the streets, or?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say this is street photography, but it's a portrait taken in Nepal on the streets, and so this happens if you build up a relationship with someone. If somebody is feeling comfortable with you being there, and with actually putting a very big black camera straight into somebody's face, right? That's, for a lot of people, that's still a very scary thing. Maybe not for people sitting here, but for many it is. For me, it is still. It would be, Yeah. So this picture existed because I've been talking to this guy for 10 minutes and joking, and he offered me a beer, and you just said, and then this happens, right? But So in many scenes there is no time and space to be able to create that relationship. So then you just shoot, and you move around. But yeah, so many different ways of approaching.
You mix
a scene.
all these different,
Yeah.
And for example, do you use lightning on this?
No, I never shoot with artificial lighting. Not a single picture in the book is taken with the light source.
And
So I use natural light.
You use and is there a lot of after design on the pictures?
Yeah, post-production, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, not for me. I get this question a lot, but I have a very unique own style of post-producing images. I would never alter an image. I would never change an image. But what I try to do in post-production is to enhance the experience, the first user experience. So I try to tell the story, like replicate the experience, how I entered the scene, how I felt meeting this man.
How you saw it at that
exactly,
moment. Yeah.
And sometimes a picture needs like very little tweaks, and sometimes a picture needs a lot of post-production. It varies very much. But I never change images. So I would never create something that it's non-existent. It's always a representation of reality.
So there is some sort of expressionism over it. If you're feeling at the moment of
once again, aesthetical realism, I think that's maybe the best way to put it, like to beautify the reality slightly.
And this is also something you found out yourself, that this is the way that for you are the most beautiful, or the most touching images.
I think so, it's just a matter of trying, I think. So when you talk post-production, I think the best way to learn post-production is by post-producing the images yourself, just by working on just to understand what you do, understand the controls, whether you work with Photoshop or Lightroom or any other source. Just understand the basic controls, and that's what I did for the last 10 years. But lots and lots of failure, just to create your own style, your own identity, and
because these how do you say, your signature is very remarkable. That it's so aesthetic, right? Because you say in the little voiceover of the video, you talk about that you show raw life, but the pictures, on the contrary, aren't raw. They're like showing the beauty. Really, is that a conscious like?
Yeah, it's a. I'm not sure if it sounds like a paradox a little bit, right?
I don't know.
No, but
it's also the different perspective you can have on things. Yeah.
No, I think post-producing images. Back in the day, working with film, there was little post-production. Film was creating the exact vibe and feel you wanted to achieve in an image. So these days, there's many technical possibilities of enhancing an image, and I think when you do it in a respectful manner, where you stay very close to yourself, you can still tell raw stories by applying the right techniques. So I think rawness in storytelling is not necessarily about raw from straight out of a camera, but more about the raw moment, a raw coverage of emotion, and whether you use post-production is not making a big difference, I think.
And do you think you became very popular at Instagram? You said, I started making photographers even before you quit your job, I guess. When you start posting it on Instagram, and you got a huge response. Can you analyze it for yourself?
Why this? I think social media on 2014 completely changed my life. The birth of Instagram gave a complete strange and scary spin to my life back in the day, because many people, like many early adapters, were realizing that by investing as much possible time you can in a social media app, you can grow as an artist by gaining an audience. An audience pays you for prints, pays you for assignments. Brands start paying you for assignments. So suddenly there's like a whole new.
You really got a lot of. For people who are not familiar with Instagram, you got a lot of email and letters because you were.
Well, there's a whole new business model. Suddenly, out of the blue, there's a whole new business model emerging, and that's. Well, when I look back now, I realized the scary impact that it had on my life. And nowadays, 2019, I think people look too much in binary terms when it comes to social media. So you hate it or you love it, you use it or you don't use it. But I think by using it in the right way, these days, that's where you make the difference. So I started off in 2014 by completely diving headfirst into the social media game. And that was part of the reasons why I was collapsing a few years later, because it's like I always call it like some sort of digital Hunger Games. So it's like social media is like a beast. You have to feed the beast when you want the beast to grow, and the algorithm was completely dictating the way I was looking at image making and I was looking at stories. So at some stage I was becoming some sort of an Instagram landscape photographer, while in essence I was more of a human-based photographer. So Instagram pulled me slowly away from who I was as a person and as a photographer.
Wait, you mean, let me understand this right. You mean the way the pictures they kept on showing to your audience were not the pictures you wanted to?
No, Instagram dictates you what is perceived as very likable. And if you listen to that algorithm, but that's the bad side.
So you got a big challenge of this voice saying what you should do and what you wanted to do.
Exactly, but that's the bad. So there's also a good side, because the reason why you are here today, the reason why there is a book, the reason why I'm sitting here making money as a photographer is because of Instagram. So I cannot only tell the dark side of the story, I also have to tell the other side, which is it's a beautiful app if you know how to use it in the right way, if you know how to balance your body, your soul, and your mind within that whole crazy tornado of social media, right? So, and what it brought me in 2015, 16, 17 is a lot of free trips, which was great at that time because I was still working, and I had 50 days off a year, and I was spending every single holiday being not paid, but I was going on holiday for free, and that was great at that time. But at some stage in my life, I was getting annoyed of going through the same routine every time again, and then I started moving back towards human-based stories, more towards the Because People Matter work, more towards my own emotion and heart as a human being, and then the book existed. So it's been like it's going.
Well,
it's
one
going
more
up like
question about this phase of that you get all these offers of travels, etc. I think a lot of people who are sitting here who also are photographer wish to be so gain such a big audience at Instagram and get letters, etc. So why do you think you got so? What was the success of your pictures?
Yeah, so how this whole audience started, I got like a very, very big viral push when I made a movie about a place called Zaandam, which is
very
pretty
exotic
close,
as well.
Very exotic, so stories everywhere. No, no, but I made a in 2015 drones was absolutely, when you were owning a drone, you were owning the game, right? So now everybody is owning drones, but I was a very early adapter when it came to drone photography. And I made a drone video about Zaandam, about what's the name of the place, Zaanse Schans, and that went completely viral on every single news station in the Netherlands. So it got picked up on RTL Late Night, and I got like 35 or 40,000 followers in not even 48 hours. So that exactly proves that period of time, right? In that Instagram was hot at that time, social media was hot, and you could go viral overnight with doing the right things. And so part of my success, when you consider Instagram followers as a success, I'm not really sure if that's the right thing to do, but if you consider having a big audience as a success, that happened more or less in one hit, because the after effect of that hit was also pretty big. So, and like aerial photography back in that time gave me a lot of leverage and exposure amongst tourism partners, people that know how to use a drone were very scarce at that time. So it's just being lucky, being in the right time and doing the right thing. And I know people that gained like 2.5 million followers in just a few weeks by going viral with a few shots. You know, but that happened. Nowadays it's not possible anymore. So the last thing I'm considering being successful right now is followers and Instagram and
You're
an
done
audience.
with that for now.
I'd rather have 10 people that show up at events like this than have 120,000 people that never show up and just interact online. You know, just like it's all about the personal. I think and that's also completely different than how I looked at social media and photography a few years ago. So there's a lot of
changing
development and change happening.
And now there's this very solid work, and I think this is a good moment to invite also to the stage Gunifort Wambaga, and this is your chair. He is co-owner and part of the publishing department of Mendo, the publisher of the book. So this is the book. I hope you can still see these two men sitting
Hi there.
behind. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Briefly, for people who didn't Google it yet and don't know, what is Mendo?
Okay, so Mendo is a company based here in Amsterdam. And by the way, hi, Gunifort. I
Hi,
was
Gunifort,
introduced
yes.
properly by, but
Gian,
I am the publisher at Mendo and one of the co-owners. So we are based here in Amsterdam, and most notably, we have a super beautiful bookstore here in the 9th Streets area. It's on the screen, in which we focus on what we call visual books. So no novels, no study material, visually pleasing books. Besides that, we have a beautiful e-commerce platform called Mendo.nl, on which we offer the books internationally, and you can get a deep dive into many of the books that we offer. And the third pillar is a publishing arm, and this is our latest book, Tales from the Roads Less Traveled.
And how did this book started for you?
I still had some for the first question, because a lot of people regard us as bookmakers or booksellers, but personally, I don't really like those two terms, because I don't think they cover everything we do. So for me, Mendo is we're sort of a group of designers and curators. Pretty much that's all we do. We do have a bookstore and we sell books.
You also make books together with...
Exactly. I think most of, at least our time, is spent on curating what's happening in the real life online, and try to present it to you guys through this medium of a book. So I think nowadays, also with like social media that you guys were talking about, information overload, image overload, that's what I see Mendo as a group of people that continually think, curate, search, debate of everything that's relevant, and try to decide what's worth putting in a book.
So, and why were a piece picture worth putting in a book?
So you guys already talked about one of our colleagues, Yuri, who lives in the same street as P, and he was the first person that introduced P and his Instagram page, at least to myself. Obviously, immediately starting following P. Beautiful images. I think he was just starting his 18-month travel, or maybe a bit before, but there was a lot of activity happening.
What did you like so much about his pictures?
For me, and basically, it was the fact that there were, you could see that there was a very good eye behind it. And it was, and was very relevant in regards to social media. This last part that P was talking about of understanding the algorithm and understanding what the beast wants, I could immediately identify that in his page. Like, okay, this is not somebody who's just, putting stuff up willy-nilly. So that was, I think, the introduction. We reached out to P to see if he would be even interested in publishing a book, but also to see how much content he already had, what he had in mind for this project. Personally, I think the moment as a publisher I said, okay, P is really somebody that I think we should work with, is the Ahold story that you guys were talking about. So similar to myself, a couple of years ago, I was, waking up every morning, putting on a suit and going to ABN AMRO to work in banking. So I like the fact that the background and the motivation was similar, and knew from myself that people that make such choices based on passion are usually motivated people. So
could you see this life force behind? Could you see that in his pictures, or was it that you heard the story and thought, hey, there's maybe even more?
I could see it in his pictures, but I could definitely see it in the little organization he had put up called Because People Matter. So just looking at the Instagram followers, just looking at his activity, like looking how he was approaching his photography online, showed me that at least compared to many other book proposals that we're receiving here from the Netherlands, he was already operating on quite a high level. If you put in mind the fact that I told you that what we do is curate the internet pretty much on certain topics. shows that everybody pretty much who's quite active online and has a significant following in photography is usually somewhat on our radar. So P included.
So, and what was the when did you find out what the content of this book should be?
So one of the challenges, I think, is that we had two parties. We had P in a photographer who was also on the brink of his travels, big travels of 18 months. So the first thing we did is think of, okay, a book has 288 pages which need to be filled. I think people sometimes underestimate how big of a challenge that is. So I don't know if anybody of you ever went to uni. You remember doing your like graduation thesis of 20 pages, and it needs to be faultless, perfect, whatever. So think of 300 pages with that same criteria level.
Do you think you underestimate the whole idea of making a book?
Very much.
Yeah?
Yeah. Very much. I would do it straight again, like the exact same way we did it, but I completely underestimated. I think I speak on behalf of the whole team. The impact of, we always call it overseas bookmaking, right? So no, we were traveling for 18 months from one side of the world to the other side of the world. We went to mostly very hidden places, like hidden maybe, very remote places. So there's no Wi-Fi, there's barely 3G, transferring images doesn't work, transferring copy doesn't work, and editing images is very, very hard in that kind of environment. So we were, I think I never in my whole life worked so many hours for something as for this book while being on the road traveling. So people always think when you come back and you tell them you went on an 18-month trip and that you just somehow enjoyed life or like lie on the beach, or that's some questions you get, like how can you still be tired after 18 months of traveling? But so it was a very, very big project.
But did you travel in order of the book? Did you know I'm going to make a book, so now we're going to do this big travel, or did you went out traveling and then the opportunity of making a book came?
No, we always had me and Jess always had the plan of leaving for like at least a full year, and we had that planned for a long time already. And then this opportunity existed with Mando, so that completely catalyzed the whole idea behind the book.
And did it also change where you were going? How did you know where you wanted to go for this book? Because maybe you should introduce briefly what we see in this book. Like,
good question.
Shall I?
Yeah. One of you.
So as the title says, it's Tales from Roads Has Traveled. So in basis, every chapter is a unique story that at least the general public, like myself, doesn't experience when we travel. So I remember one of the stories that
maybe we can see one. We can see a series that makes it.
I should, if you find one of the full series, the country series, that gives a good impression. I think if you've, for instance, this one. Yeah. So these images are taken in a monastery in Nepal, just outside of Kathmandu. So what actually, how we both had some personal preference, like a list of places we wanted to visit when we started to plan this trip. And we just put these two lists on one table and find the overlap, and then start planning an itinerary. And then we started to find stories, like meaningful stories that we could shoot along that route, right? So we knew we were going to start in Asia and end in Latin America and perhaps some Africa in between. So there was some sort of chronological order. And then I just started to do research online for a year and a half back home behind my desk in Amsterdam by just finding stories. And if there's one thing very complicated, annoying, and frustrating about being a photographer or a storyteller, is to do all that work from back home behind the desk, because you have zero connection with the local communities, you have zero entrance into local authorities. So it's a lot of work to do it from back home. So most people forget about the workload that goes into a story like this story. This story is the wrong example, but if you open up the story of Patagonia, that's a very good example, right? This one. So this is 10 months or maybe even more of preparation. So I knew I wanted to make a real story about real gaucho culture. And there's lots of gaucho bullshit these days, because every second luxury property in Patagonia is employing people who have zero affection with gaucho culture as gauchos, learn them to ride horses, and entertain tourists. Right, so it's very easy to find places like this, but I wanted to create a meaningful story about struggles of real gaucho culture. And well, where do you start? You know, I had zero contact in gaucho culture at that time. So you just start by Googling inspiring gaucho story, right? That's where you start. So it's a very long way from that starting point towards finding a family who is able to accommodate you for 2 weeks or for 1 week, or who is able to trust you to document their life. We were sleeping in the boys' bedroom in the middle of the house. We were invited for dinner for more than a week, 3 times a day. They shared like all their emotions and stories about the future of their own gaucho culture with us. So it's a lot of work that goes into building up a relationship, being based in Amsterdam with a gaucho family that it has 3G internet one time in 3 weeks, every 3 weeks. And then there's the question, if you go there, is everything existing what you plan in your head, right? So, because the only way you communicate is by email. And so it's sometimes it's scary. Like the story of Uganda, for instance, that's also on the list.
Wait. Let's stay one second at the Gauchos. These are very different style, very different aesthetics, right? This is, I didn't see that before.
No, so this is, if you ask me about where I want to head in the future when it comes to photographic identity, this is one of the stories I would name as an example. So this is this is the most recent story I shot for the book. We shot this year in April, I guess, or March.
Right.
So it's completely different than what you see on my first account on Instagram. It has nothing to do with each other, nothing.
Right. So this is one you thought first about a story, the seed that's planted at home, and then you go there and you see. You have to interact with what happens. And the other part, for example, the monastery, that was more that you made a lot of pictures there, and back home behind your desk, you're gonna make a story out of it.
Yeah,
right?
So that's right. It's a very big difference between the preparation for Patagonia and for Nepal. The story of Nepal existed as soon as we arrived in the scene. So we knew we were gonna. We did a 14-day, like a 10 or 14-day, I can't remember, 10-day retreat. So we did a 10-day retreat in a monastery. And we got completely overwhelmed by the power of the emotional power of Buddhism. And then we visited a few other monasteries on the way. And somehow it started to grow in us that we wanted to create a story for the book about that emotional impact Buddhism had on our journey so far.
Right.
So it happened along the way. So it was not the seed was never not planted back home because we were not aware that this was going to happen.
No, but it started to grow during. Yeah.
So there's many different ways how stories existed, and these are 2 examples.
And this, you do not only tell the stories by images in the book. There's also a lot of text in there, right?
Yeah.
Written by Jessica. When did you decide to accompany the images by text?
Yeah, so that's something that existed in between Mendo and us. I think we both at some stage realized that some narratives in the book were so deep and so complex that it needed. Well, if you ask me personally, I always like pictures without copy, pictures with lots of options for interpretation. I like them most, right? The best pictures in history, they don't need any words because they speak for themselves. But if you tell a story consisting of multiple pictures and it's complex, deep matter, I think we suddenly realized the stories are beautiful. Why we don't share them?
And it's the big difference, I think, between his previous medium of Instagram and a book. So I like the question of the photography style, because that's one of the subjects I think we've interacted on the most. So we started out with the base of almost 10 years of photography, but solely for the internet and solely for Instagram, and that had a very different editing than what's normal for a book or what works best in a book. So that's where we actually started the conversation in, okay, for the book, which photography style are we heading to? And for me, it was a real privilege to see Pie's style develop. I like the fact that every time his last story is the story that's going to be his future identity. Well, I think
he's developing a lot. Yeah, beautiful.
Well, I think the next story after the Gauchos will be the one. But yeah, with the book, the question we asked ourselves is in Dutch. I'm just because most people are Dutch here. I don't know what the translation is. What's het bestaansrecht voor het boek en voor dit project. So to make a book and a project of this scale, we're offering the book in 50 countries. It's quite of a huge financial investment and especially a huge human capital investment. The hours that Yes and P have in this project is insane. If you see something like Patagonia, you need to know there's a publisher behind it that's pushing them to send the images they shot that week, and they have to transfer I don't know how many gigabytes from somewhere in Patagonia. Those are some of the struggles that come with making a book. But I really feel that this medium, and that's I hope a lot of the Fotokronieks also coming is going to be based around photography books. That the medium is also pushing both of us, being Mendo or being P, because it's a very scary sort of framework to fill out and to fill up on a certain level, whether it be text, whether it be images, whether it be design.
So if I'm really honest about making this book, is that most of the time, I think 80% of the time, me and Jess had absolutely no clue what we were doing. And we were just creating a story, try to achieve some emotional impact. I know I have some eye for taking pictures. I know Jess is very good in conceptualizing text. So that's what you know, but you have absolutely zero clue about is this going to be different than other books? Is this going to be hitting people straight in the face with emotion? Or is this going to be one big failure? No clue. So
right, so you knew how to make the series, but the process of putting that in, editing it in a book was totally...
Well, everything was new. And I saw Gunny growing as well as a publisher. I saw other people in the team growing. I saw Jazz growing as a human being and as a copywriter. So it was just a bunch of young people trying to achieve something meaningful, and let's see where it's going to take us.
Because I see even the how do you say the paper is different, right? Some pictures are a different.
Yeah. So credits to Joost. Where's Joost?
Over there in the corner.
So Joost is the designer of the book.
Right.
So typography, paper.
So were you involved with all this discussion, with all these decisions? And did you understand all the decisions?
No, not often, but I learned a lot. So was some sneak peek into design as well for me. So it's really it's not some sort of commercial pitch, but it's been a very inspiring and fulfilling journey to see everything come together. Just to see at some stage you can just trust the guys that they make the right. In the beginning I was very involved in every single detail. Gunny made a lot of jokes about it. So I try to have control on every single part of the process. But at some stage I started to realize, just let it go. It's like everybody knows what they're doing, and when as soon as you, and that's also more or less the rode draad.
Common denominator.
Yeah, exactly. In the last 6-7 years of the development as a photographer, just let go and just trust that the dots connect in the future. Just trust that your gut and your intuition will bring you where you want to be, and the universe will help you a little bit. Stuff like that. Yeah. And that also happened in the making of this book. Very much.
I have one more question, actually many more, but then I will also go to the audience for a little bit in between, so I'm coming. But how are the stories connected in the book? Because you say like this is a story about Buddhism, this is a story about gauchos. Like what is for you the concept or the common? What was the word? Yeah, the rode draad. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do with the book, or what we are trying to do with the book, is to address social, political, or maybe sometimes even economical issues. So issues with a very big, grand scheme of impact in a very personal way. So what I like doing is by picking up a certain character, let's say Victor, who is the son of this gaucho farm, or let's say Albert, who is a ranger in a park in Uganda, or let's say Karen, who is a Swedish nun living in Nepal. So we take all these characters and we address bigger issues by interviewing their life, by looking at their life. And not every single story is framed that way, but I think when you ask me about the common denominator of the book, one of them is definitely to look at storytelling in a personal way by addressing bigger topics.
And these bigger topics are like diverse. So there are many big topics in this big book, full of stories.
There's climate-related topics. There is species that go extinct related topics. There is cultural depression kind of topic. So it's very, I think,
migration,
migration issues. So and not maybe in the way you would expect at a world press kind of. It's more like an aesthetical framed perception of reality. I think it's completely. It's not. It has nothing to do with hardcore photojournalism or documentary photography. Maybe in the future it will a little bit more, but. So it's just a very aesthetical way of framing reality.
What do you hope the readers or the watchers will experience?
Yeah, so if you carefully listen to the movie in the beginning, the little India clip, I think what is very important to realize when it comes to the current state of the environment and of the planet in general, is that as soon as you start accepting that there is some sort of holistic element in being human, that there is some sort of everybody is the same kind of vibe, although you look different and you believe different and you eat different and whatever you do, but there is some sort of universal feeling. I think that's what we want to achieve with the book. So whether it's a tribal chief or a shepherd girl in a desert or a ranger in Uganda, we all have the same kind of not only the same DNA, but also the same kind of fears, insecurities, desires. Everybody wants to be happy. If you start interviewing these people, whether they live 30 meters high up in a tree, or in a cave, or in a very big flat in the middle of New York, you always get the same underlying emotional response. So my dream is, this guy, right? I was asking him, what is your dream? I mean, it's like, my dream is that I once have the funds to send my kids to school, and my second dream is to buy a motorcycle and drive my wife through the valley. And if I ask one of my friends back home the same question, I get exactly the same answer. Maybe a little bit different, but you get the point, right?
And did you also portray Western people in there? Like, did you also portray people so that you really have the whole scale of the
my mother
global
is in the
universe?
book.
Your mother is in the book?
No, so my mother is in the book because I wanted to have some sort of close to home touch in the book, but that's the only story shot in Europe, which is shot in Italy. So yeah, it's a good question, and I have no answer why I actually did include. When the time frame would have been bigger and longer, I would definitely have chosen to include European stories. But as I said, the next book will definitely be close to home.
Yeah. You will have a whole career ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know, like, during dinner, then I go to the audience. But we did discuss a little bit the part about that you are traveling to all these other countries, that you are fascinated by their beauty, which you are aware that this can also have the feeling of, you say, exoticism. How did you verantwoorden that for yourself? How did you?
May I?
Oh, you, yeah.
Because Pie was just explaining to all of us what he hopes the readers will get out of this book, and I was interested about your answer, because I have a little different perspective on that. For me, what I would really like for people to get out of this book, even more than the stories or finding out that we're all similar, the thing that moves me, since a young age, I've always been interested in people like Jules Verne or Anthony Bourdain, these people with like this insatiable curiosity and who just go into the world and come back reporting to all of us like, yo, this is what I saw on the other side of the world. And at least in my personal experience, I've never thought that is a viable opportunity in life. Like, that's really something you could do. You could travel, you could meet people, sit down with honest, pure, amazing people, and actually make a living out of it. So the story of you and Jessica and making this decision and pushing it through, obviously we as Mendo identified that there was something in there, but I know you, like, even if we wouldn't have reached out to you, you would have like reached out to us and made it happen. That drive, and it's I know it's not the most sexy perspective, but that's what makes this for me very special, and I hope that all the readers can get motivated and inspired, perhaps to make a crazy decision in their own lives. Do you
is for you be enough present in the book? Do you when you see the book? We all have the opportunity to hear his personal story and to hear the background.
So can I answer?
Yeah.
So this book is not about me being present. This book is about the people in the book being present.
No, I know, but because he says for him almost the most beautiful part of the project is the people, but it's you as a person in your openness relating to these people. So that's why I asked him the question. Like for you, is he present enough in the book?
He's present enough, because he is completely right. You know, it's no need for him to be the middle point of every story, but at least a lot of the artists I have enjoyed, or I choose to invest my time and effort and mindset in, are people who do something out of the ordinary, and yeah, to be honest, like in 18 months, the trip they did, the stories, when you read them, it's really something special. And to think that this, I feel, is like the starting point for your travels and your storytelling together with Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I want to add one more brief thing. So what is important to realize is that I think 70 or 80% of the stories in this book, 70 or 80% of the areas you see in this book will completely be destroyed in 10 to 15 years from now. So it's if you ask me what is the reason why I make the book, is also because I feel the responsibility as a storyteller and as a photographer to stand up and to document this, right? And it's a very, very sad reality, and it's something we can't barely stop anymore. But we've been to areas where I had literally like everyday tears in my eyes seeing the impact of human destruction.
Right.
And so that's also something I really want to convey with the book, the fact that like maybe some sort of the last decade we can show the stories at least in the way how I see them, and I hope I can inspire people to consciously consider the impact of their behavior in the rest of their lives. It's like it's deep, but it's important.
Yeah, you want us to connect with that. Yeah. Are there questions for Pie or Gunnifort so far? Yes, thank you.
Hi, Pete. I have a question about the way you light your photography. I see that a lot of the faces are really evenly lit. Do you use any external diffuser, reflectors, or do you wait for cloud coverage? How do you approach it?
Yeah, so I mostly shoot, I never shoot with artificial lighting, but I mostly shoot in the first and the last 2 hours of the day. So that requires lots of discipline when it's about getting up in the morning. But when it's blue skies, I never shoot in between 30 minutes after sunrise and 30 minutes before sunset. Never, because not a single picture will be having the light I'm looking for. When it's a cloud cover day, you can shoot all day. Doesn't really make a difference. But
if you see a nice moment appear, you just leave the shot? Like
no, I will take it, but maybe not. It doesn't end up in the book. But I'm not. I think when it comes to, I think choice in photography is more about the choices you make not to take pictures than the choices you make to take pictures. So it's more important to learn to say no than to say yes, because these days with these fast shutters, you can take 1 million pictures a day. But that's not the way. Like being in the street and making hours as a photographer is important, but learn to say no. So in many cases when, and that comes with experience, I guess, but in many cases when I feel the light is not right, I just leave it. I'm not even going to try.
Thank you for the question.
Hi P. We had the pleasure of having some pictures from you in our shop, the tiger photos actually, at the Overtoom. And I've been wondering, I mean, you talked a lot about aesthetics today, but the last part was about the negative things you've seen in this world. And I was wondering, how do you do more than just tell the story and actually get people to act?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think we're living in an age of, the last few years we've been living in an age of awareness, and we're very fastly actually, very speedily transferring into an age of action. And what people mostly forget, because for instance the Amazon, what happened in the last few weeks is there's significantly more call to action when you compare it to previous disasters or previous events, because people start to realize that action is the time of awareness is over. Like our time is up. So what I'm trying to do when it comes to storytelling, and I have to blame myself for not being, not investing more time in this, but is to offer people calls to action. So by actually offering opportunities to offer help, to donate money. I think that's more the direction I wanted to move in the future. But it comes with a lot of effort and time to be able to set things up like this. But so yeah, it's hard to as a photographer, especially when you operating completely on yourself. I'm not working for an agency. I'm not having any assistant. I'm not having a trainee or an intern. So I'm doing all the work myself together with Jess, and I have only 2 hands. And I really hope in the future that I will be able to invest more time and more money into calls to action, because that's the only way storytellers can make a difference these days.
Do you think you need a call to action? Like, do you feel that that's your job in this world, or do you feel you just need to show stories?
Yeah, I think the time of showing stories is over. Everybody is showing stories. So you just need to do something different when you consider yourself to be an environmental photographer. I'm not sure if that's what I am, but at least I'm trying to have an environmental impact, whether it's on nature or culture or wildlife. But
not by flying, right?
Yeah. That's a whole other discussion. But happy to talk about it. But yeah, I think call to action is very distinctive when it comes to als je je hoofd boven het maaiveld uit wil steken, dan moet je gewoon iets anders doen dan. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's that's a big struggle, because it's not easy. It's not like swipe up link, donate money, swipe up. That's not how it works. It needs a deeper meaning. It needs to be something very well thought of. And in most cases, so most of the stories in the book, these people don't really benefit from having more money in their lives. More money is only faster destroying their lives. So it's very complex. You can better send like a whole bag of tools to these guys living in the trees in Papua than to send them like some bank account with cash, because that's completely destroying the culture. So it's that's the paradox of these areas, which are very fragile when it comes to ecosystems that die or cultures that disappear. Money is not the solution. So a call to action doesn't necessarily mean to have some financial impact. The call to action can also mean to create discussion and awareness, and to come together in events like this and talk about matter like this. So if next time you're going to book your holiday, you think about this event, and I think that's also a call to action. So it's not only monetary impact.
I have a few more questions in the audience.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm too curious about this question. So, and I have a mic.
Okay, yeah. Well, you go.
But would you say you're more of an artist or an activist? I'm curious which lane you lean more in personally.
Yeah, so I think I'm more an activist. I never really felt like an artist. Don't even know what the definition of an artist is. To create art, maybe. Yeah. I like the overall message of photography more than I actually like photography. I think that's the best way to put it. So, and maybe also driven by the fact that I believe the world needs more activists, and the world needs more people that stand up and speak up and protest and change things. So maybe that's also a reason why I would say activist over artist. Yeah.
Sorry. So I'm just curious. You made this switch from the corporate world to becoming a photographer, and I'm curious. Did you ever felt insecure, and what did you do? And do you still feel insecureness as a photographer right now?
Yeah. So the most vulnerable moment of my life has been to quit my job at Albert Heijn. And I still get somehow emotional, or it really hits me every time again I think about how I felt at that time. So, and I've been speaking up about this a lot, and I think the world needs more vulnerability. Doesn't necessarily mean everybody has to speak about it. I like to speak about it. If it's not your thing to talk about your emotions, feel free to, please don't, right? But insecurity is like the common denominator of the last 5 years of my artistic development. And it's in the preface of the book, Jess wrote about it. There is so much insecurity in my life at the moment, I don't even know where to start. So, but that also gives a lot of freedom and freedom to move, It's like, in the last 15 years, I planned every single stage of my life. People were asking me every day, where are you in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 years? And you can completely plan de maakbaarheid. I don't even know what's the English word, but de maakbaarheid van je leven. That's something that is completely destroying people's decisions in life, because everything seems within reach, and everything needs to be planned. And stepping out of that, and being insecure and being vulnerable, is the best thing you can do. And whether you want to talk about it or not, that's the second decision. And if you feel good about talking, please do, because spreading this message of becoming more vulnerable is going to change the whole planet if we do it collectively.
Hi, you just said that within the corporate life you have to plan everything, but you planned your trip to Patagonia for 10 months. Mm. So how is that different?
Yeah, good question.
I can answer that also.
Okay.
So a very big difference, I think, with his previous occupation and now is that I think a lot of his income is based on this. So you produce a beautiful book, and there's no security that the book will be bought. For instance, there's no security for him that he will be able to do his next trip or the trip after that. I think that's the biggest difference. Just the insecurity of not knowing when.
There's another big difference. I think when I was working in a corporate company, I was planning every stage of my life by what other people seem to find important. Right, so you judge your own actions by the expectations of others. And what I'm doing now is every step I take is fully because I want to take that step, and because my intuition tells me to do this or to do that. Right, and that feels like two complete different worlds, because I was living some sort of life that society created for me, and which brought me a lot. Right, it brought me where I am today, but at some stage I didn't feel it anymore. And what I feel now is that, although I make less money and although I have less status, maybe, or maybe less, I achieve less in the eye of a lot of people, I don't know, can imagine, it feels so free and so quiet and so in line with who I am. So that's that's black and white.
Yeah, my question is actually about this problem maybe that I perceive you describe. So your experience basically up to the moment that you decided I want to be only a photographer. I think that describes also kind of a social problem that we have, especially maybe in the West. Would that be also a topic of your interest to write stories about?
Yeah, so one thing that's very, very strange, I think, in the world at the moment, and I found in every single country I've traveled to, and especially in the West, is that you see a lot of Eastern influences moving their way towards the West. So not only yoga and mindfulness, but just being more conscious about life is coming more or less from being more quiet and more silent. It's coming from the East, right? So what you see in the East, let's call the East is maybe not the right word, but let's call it the East, is that people have some sort of fake perception of reality, that the West, where people make money and achieve dreams and have status, is like some sort of ideal, right? So what you see is like the paradox of two big groups of people moving in complete different opposite directions. And the people in the East are not realizing what they have in their own hands, right? The connection with nature, the connection with the human spirit, which is completely disappearing in a very fast pace, because all these people are visualizing their dream in the West, because that's what they see on TVs, and they want to have phones and football shirts, and they want to dress up, and they want to ride bikes, and so that's strange and scary at the same time. So never before, when I'm talking to friends, and there's waiting lists for Vipassana retreats everywhere you go in Europe. Like, what's going on, you know? And in the West, if you travel to the East, you see people dreaming about driving cars. So that's scary. So that is definitely going to be I like this topic a lot, and I like to research it and read about it and try to find visuals that tell stories about it. Yeah.
I hear so many new themes and stories you can make books and pictures about in the upcoming years. Do you have a concrete next project in mind?
Yeah, there's a few trips coming up, but not in the line of the book. So I do commercial assignments as well because I have to make money as well. Just be open about this. But there's a few big projects coming up for next year. So I'm talking about a trip to Ladakh, which I'm in the final stages of planning now for next year, and a trip to Yamal Peninsula in Siberia. To document in Siberia, we're going to document the migration in the snowy season. So we're going to see what's the impact of climate change on at least those border areas in the north. And in Ladakh, we're going to do pretty much the same. So there's lots of climate-related issues, and I just want to find a human angle to tell stories. Not because I think that's also something which you can expect more about in the future, is to address the climate issue from a more of a cultural, human-based perspective. So to bring not from a nature, environmental,
political,
political perspective, of just bring it back to the people in the areas that get hit most. Right?
Yeah.
More like the first story of the book is called Stories That Whisper, the Whispers of Change, I think it's called, and I think that's you're going to see a lot of this, like stories that don't get the attention in the media and in the politics, but stories that actually matter more than any other narrative. Yeah.
Let's. Are there any more very urgent questions for now? No, because I like to close with the people of the book, because we've been talking a lot about you and about your aesthetics. But as you said, this book was meant to feel connected with the people you visited, and I heard you also showed the book to some of these people. Can you tell us briefly who these people are and show us the presentation of the book and how what that meant for them actually?
So when I would have the financial funds, I would definitely travel myself to see their reaction firsthand. But what we had to do instead is to ship them a book. And so what you see in this, so this guy's called Melius. He's on the cover of the book, and there's a little video, and you feel that these people they have absolutely they don't know the concept of book, right? They don't know the concept of being on the cover of a book. So you feel they're very shy, they're very introvert. So you feel how extremely awkward this whole situation is by looking at this book, right? It's like they don't even know what to do. So there's a little facial expressions. I think there's another movie. But seeing this book in their hands is exactly the reason why I get up in the morning, and why I do what I do, right? Because these people, some people argue they don't look like this as soon as the cameras disappear, but these people live like this, they act like this is their life, and my book is in their hut at the moment, and that's something very special, I think. But judging by the expressions and the faces, I'm not sure if they're happy with it or not. It's hard to tell, but these are very, very hard. These people have a very warm heart.
And did they understand the concept that you want to represent their story to a broader audience?
No. These guys were asking me what. So we brought vegetables on the trip for 28 days in the jungle, and they were asking me what is this. That was a carrot. So, their perception of they live in a completely different world. So mobile phones is very far away. They don't even know the shape of a carrot. Never saw it before. It doesn't grow in the jungle. So books like this is something very strange for them. Very strange.
And you also showed it to someone who did understand the concept of pictures.
This is a book arriving in Uganda. These two guys are very very high up in the tree when it comes to wildlife conservation. And they were very happy, So most of the people in the book, I have regular contact with them. So let's say once a month. For instance, a story about Albert. I text with him occasionally. So I try to keep in touch with the characters I represent in the book. So obviously in Papua that's very hard. But with these guys I have regular contact, and I'm planning to visit them soon again in Uganda. And these reactions are priceless. Like if you see how happy people get from just being inside of a book, while they don't even know how big the scope can be. Right? These guys also they know the idea of a book, but they don't have an idea of international media attention and yeah, it's funny to see how different people react.
This is a very beautiful book. You can understand. Look at these two pictures. Hello. This is fantastic.
Indeed, it's
magnificent. Look at this. Look at.
So these two guys are big decision makers, big decision makers when it comes to wildlife conservation. They're very, very high up. So, but they're just like these. We completely traversed the jungle for over a week with these rangers in a patrol surrounded by elephants, lions, poachers. But in the end of the day, they're just your friends. You know, they look scary, but they're very, very warm, kind human beings, and I always felt very warm and welcomed with them. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I would say let's dive with P into all these stories with his book that you can also buy, of course, this evening because Mendo is here and you will sign them, I guess. But we will also be downstairs in the bar for if you have more questions. So I would like to thank you very much for all your stories tonight, and you, of course, also for your contribution and you for your question and being present here with us. I hope to see you again the 1st of October for the next edition of Fotokroniek with Laila Mubarak about the youth and all their emotions. Thank you and have a nice evening. And don't forget, pay as you like.